Then Jesus said to his disciples, "The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore, ask the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into this harvest." Then Jesus summoned his 12 disciples and gave them authority over unclean spirits to cast them out and to cure every disease and sickness. These are the names of the 12 apostles. First Simon, also known as Peter, and his brother Andrew, James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John, Philip and Bartholomew, Thomas and Matthew, the tax collector, James, son of Alphaeus and Thaddeus, Simon the Cananean, and Judas Iscariot, the one who betrayed him. These 12 Jesus sent out with the following instructions: "Go nowhere among the Gentiles, and enter no town of the Samaritans, but go rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. As you go, proclaim the good news. The kingdom of heaven has come near. Cure the sick, raise the dead, cleanse the lepers, cast out demons. You received all of this without payment. Give without payment." Here ends the reading. Before I start the sermon, we have, I think, maybe a few folks that might be interested in Children's Church. Children's Church is aimed at kids from age about 2 to about 6, and it's a special message just for them that happens just in the back at the chapel. It does include Ollie the Owl, who is very popular. So if that sounds like something that might be interesting for you or your kids, I think we have a couple of folks in the back that'd be happy to take them that way. And if you want to stay in here and listen to me talk, that's fine too. So a few of them are gathering, but as they go, there's a TV show that I like a whole lot. It's been off the air for a couple of years, but I think it's still showing reruns on the Discovery Channel. It's called Dirty Jobs. Maybe some of you have seen it or heard of it. It's a great show. It's a fantastic show, for me at least, because there's really no plot you have to keep track of. You don't have to know any of the history. You don't have to really think at all, because every episode is exactly the same. It follows the host, Mike Rowe, who is an incredibly talented guy who goes out every episode to a different dirty job. Sometimes it's, spraying down and cleaning septic tanks. Sometimes it's picking up roadkill off the side of the road. Sometimes it's working in a meat processing plant. Every episode, different dirty job. And Mike goes and he meets these people who do this job every single day, day in and day out for years at a time, and he tries to do the job with them. And there's a couple of reasons I really love this show. The first is the host, Mike, is an incredibly talented person in that he can take something that seems incredibly boring and monotonous, and he can talk about it for an incredibly long amount of time and make you feel interested in what's going on. It's really uncanny how he can do it. I'm still not sure how he pulls it off. I'm really envious of that talent, though. I once listened to him describe a number 2 pencil for more than 5 minutes and was enthralled the entire time. I don't know how he does it. I wish I did. So he's a really entertaining guy, but also there's a moment in each and every one of the episodes of Dirty Jobs. It always comes to the same climax and conclusion. Basically, Mike starts working at this new dirty job, and he's given a task. You're supposed to clean a certain thing or pick up a certain thing, and there's certain parameters on this task. He has to do so many per hour or kind of keep up with the people around him. And Mike's a pretty talented guy, but he never, ever can do the job to the level of standards that they've set for him. And you can watch him try and do all of these things, and he's always falling behind or being too sloppy or messing things up. And finally, he gets so frustrated that he looks at the person who's teaching him, and he says, "Look, this is clearly impossible. What are you really supposed to do? How are you supposed to do this?" And at that moment, the same thing happens no matter what episode you're watching. The person who's been teaching Mike, who's probably spent 20 or 30 years working this job, turns to him and either with one hand or incredibly casually goes to work and does exactly what he's been struggling to do, only better, faster, and more graceful than anybody thought possible. It's always this really cool moment to watch someone who's got all of these skills that they've spent half a lifetime developing go to work. And each and every time, Mike kind of looks over at them with this sense of astonishment and amazement, and he usually says one of two things. First is, "How on earth are you able to do that? And the second is, how did you end up in this job anyway? How on earth, why would you end up here? And the people who are doing this job usually have pretty much the same answer to these two questions. When they're asked, how did you end up doing this job anyway? None of them really ever say, well, I went to college to go clean out septic tanks. No, they always say, I just kind of sort of fell into this job. It appeared there was an opportunity. I started doing it, and I never stopped. I kept going. Something in it worked for me. And then to the other question, how on earth are you able to do this? How did you get so good? They always say, well, I started doing this job, and I stood next to this person who had been doing it for 30 years. And day after day, I came and I stood next to that person, and little by little on the job, I learned. I learned a little bit more every single day. None of these jobs are jobs that you can take a class to learn how to do. You can't read a set of instruction books and have it all figured out. You have to learn on the job. I'm going to make what I think is a pretty bold statement here. I think that following Jesus is a dirty job. I think following Jesus is a dirty job in much the same way that cleaning a septic tank or cleaning roadkill off the road or any of these other jobs that Micro does is a dirty job. Because if you listen to what this gospel story says, Jesus is giving the disciples their job description. This is what it means to follow Jesus, what it means to do this job. And it means to go out into places that you may not be wanted, to go out and to heal people who are sick, to try and raise people from the dead, to try and cure and cleanse lepers, people who are on the edges and fringes of society, to spend time around people who might be possessed by demons or even crazy, to go and do all of those things and to bring the message of God to those places. That's not easy. People who are sick and who are outcast and who are crazy or have demons, they're not terribly clean people most of the time. They don't typically live in nice little neighborhoods with white picket fences. They're out in those places that we don't want to go because they're dirty or they're dangerous. This is exactly where Jesus is sending his disciples. And it's not an easy job. Jesus even accounts for that. He says, look, you're going to get kicked out of some of these towns. You're going to have to be ready for that. There are going to be people who don't like what you have to say. There might even be people who want to kill you for what you have to say. This is a dirty and dangerous and challenging job. Now, we today live in a very different world than it was 2,000 years ago, admittedly. These disciples were not going out into the same sort of world we have today. But each and every one of us is still called to follow Jesus, and that's still a very dirty and difficult job. We're called to go out to the margins of our society to care for those who are most vulnerable. People who are homeless, people who are struggling with mental illness, people who are sick. And those aren't easy places to be in. Following Jesus can even put us at odds with some of the people around us. It can change our views on the world and even politics. It can send us out into places where the people around us don't look like us or don't have the same opinions as we do. It can put us in uncomfortable situations. Time and time again, following Jesus is a challenge. And there's not really any class that you can take that's going to help you have it all figured out. There's not really any book you can read that'll give you the instructions of how to follow Jesus. And if you think maybe the Bible comes close, I'd say you should read through that again, because the Bible is full of stories about people who have no idea what they're doing. Following Jesus is something that you can only learn by doing. It's something that you need on-the-job training for. One of the miracles of the story in the gospel lesson isn't that Jesus sent these disciples out. It's that the next day, those disciples woke up again and they got back to work. And the next day, they woke up again and they did the same thing. And the next day, and the next day, and the next day, those 12 spent their entire lives trying to do what Jesus sent them out to do. And the people that they met, every once in a while, their lives would be changed. And they took up the same calling. caring for those on the edges of society, doing that dirty and difficult job. I would imagine if you had Mike Rowe go back to those 12 disciples and go and try and do that job with them and ask them that very same question, how did you get into this? How did you get started with this crazy job? The answer that those disciples would give would probably be pretty much the same as everybody else Mike Rowe's ever interviewed. I just sort of fell into it. There was this guy, Jesus, and he came around and we were fishing and we just had to follow him and he talked us into these things and the next thing we knew, here we are. It's a dirty job. But the interesting thing is that when you look at people who do dirty jobs, there's something about them you might not expect. In fact, after the show Dirty Jobs finished filming, Mike Rowe was interviewed a number of times. He did over 100 different dirty jobs, and people would always ask him, what were you most surprised about in doing all of these things? And just about every time, Mike would say, what I was most surprised about is that these people who are doing jobs most of us would never dream of touching are some of the most down-to-earth, happy, and satisfied people. They're not necessarily passionate about what they do. There are a few people who would say they're passionate about cleaning out septic tanks, but they have this sense of accomplishment and satisfaction with doing a job well and doing a job that needs to be done. He even went so far to say that in just about every town there is someone going by picking up roadkill off of the side of the street, literally whistling while they work. People who do these kinds of jobs have this innate sense of satisfaction that seems to defy all expectation. And I think maybe in that there's a little hint of why. Because following Jesus is the same kind of dirty job, and there's something that happens when you have this challenging and difficult task in front of you. We don't get it right all of the time. Maybe we don't even get it right most of the time, but every once in a while, when you take on a really difficult job, something clicks, and it just works, and something gets accomplished, and you can see just a little piece of what you've done. When we follow Jesus every once in a while, a moment like that happens, and we see something amazing. We see in the person right next to us or in the person sitting across from us, if only for a moment, a glimpse of God looking back at us, a glimpse of Jesus Christ working alongside us. We see in a person or in a place that we never expected, God at work. When you get a glimpse like that, it's something that Jesus calls the kingdom of God. It's seeing the world the way God wants it to be, the world that God is creating right now. And that glimpse is an addictive kind of thing. It changes you. It sends you out looking for it again and again, even out into a dirty, difficult, hard job. And as we go out, again and again, we get that little glimpse. It keeps us coming back. It changes who we are. That's the story of this gospel lesson, this story of being sent out on a difficult and dirty job and seeing God in the midst of it. Would you pray with me? Oh, gracious God, you have called us to difficult tasks. You send each of us out on a path that we're not sure we can walk, to do something we're not quite ready for yet. As you send us out, walk with us. Teach us how to follow you. Teach us to do that dirty job. Teach us to not be afraid. And as we go forth this day, help us to go and make us ready.